Thank you all for being here. As a member of the Senate Budget Committee, my recommendations have focused mostly on the budget side and on the Senate side, not on the appropriations side or the House side. And I'd like to ask to put into the record of the proceeding a letter that I've written to the chairs making some of those recommendations in writing for the Senate Budget Committee.
Without objection.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the good work and advice of my colleague Senator Perdue in some of the conversations that we've had leading up to that. It seems to me that there are some very baseline facts that need to inform any conversation about our long-term debt. And I'd like to ask all the witnesses just to kind of go through this like a checklist, because I don't think there's much debate about them. It is commonly accepted, is it not, that the metric by which a sustainable amount of debt would be measured is the debt to GDP ratio. Whatever the disagreement might be about what that ratio should be, the metric of debt to GDP is the commonly accepted metric, correct?
Debt held by the public.
Correct.
Not the total debt.
Any further dispute with that? Okay, we got all yeses with that adjustment. The second observation I have is that we are highly unlikely to achieve that debt to GDP ratio, whatever we should determine it to be, instantly, which to me suggests that there needs to be a glide slope of some period of years that will put us on the path to that. Is there any disagreement that that is simply a necessary part of the analysis of getting to a sustainable debt to GDP ratio?
Agree completely.
All agreed.
Agree completely, but to Senator Perdue's comment, 2/3 of that budget is on automatic pilot, so to speak, that being the Social Security, Medicare, the entitlement program.
It's a good lead into my next point, which is that if you are going to calculate deficit in any particular period, you won't mathematically get it right if you don't look at appropriated spending plus healthcare spending plus tax spending. And when I say tax spending, I mean the more than we actually collect that goes out the back door of the tax code in various tax provisions, and then revenues. From a point of view of the mathematics, are those not the four key elements without which you can't actually get to a correct answer?
Correct.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, good. So the reason I ask what I think are these basic foundational questions is because the present Budget Committee process does not require us to do any of those things. It does not require us to sit down and consider and vote on a sustainable debt to GDP ratio. It does not require us to sit down and discuss and vote on a glide slope that gives us a reasonable period of time to get there. And it does not require us to look at those four elements. So from a process point of view, that is part of the focus of this letter. Another piece of our problem is that, as has been repeatedly pointed out, the budget reconciliation process has been more or less hijacked to provide a fast lane around traditional Senate regular order for particular political priorities of the majority, and indeed, in some cases, deficit increasing priorities of that present majority. Could I ask each of you to provide for the record your recommendations as to what language we might consider to cabin the budget reconciliation process so that it is redirected back to its original goal, which is to keep our deficits and debt under control? That's going to take too long in my remaining 39 seconds, but would you send that to us in writing so we have your views on that?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I'll mention, and it's a corollary of this, is that presently there is no procedural path in the Senate Budget Committee for bipartisan work. I don't think we're going to get this done if we don't have an avenue that encourages us to work in bipartisan fashion. We can trade blows back and forth with majority-driven, jammed through with simple majorities, budgets and reconciliation measures, but ultimately we're going to have to look at this in a bipartisan fashion. And so my urgent concern is that we create a parallel bipartisan budget bypass just in case that bipartisanship can be achieved. You can't mandate bipartisanship, but by God, you ought to make a way for it if it can happen. Mr. Hoagland, you're energetically signaling.
I don't know if this
Microphone, please.
I don't know if this rule still exists, but under the earlier time frame, if the budget resolution had not been reported out of the Budget Committee in the Senate by April the 1st, budget resolutions that had been introduced, if you and Senator Perdue had introduced a budget resolution yourself, it would have been automatically discharged and put on the calendar. That's one way of creating a bipartisan. If the chairman and the ranking member are not getting their work done, that doesn't preclude the two of you from putting together your own resolution and putting it out there and getting it off the calendar is a different issue. But you could still do that under existing rules, as I understand.
There's an opportunity for considerable mischief there as well as considerable bipartisanship.
Very good.